Hi everybody, welcome to Paint Consistencies, Getting Them Right. Now this is one for the beginners, and this is one of the things that sort of every beginner struggles with, is their paint consistency, because when you get it wrong the brush is a nightmare and then you start having problems with your brush. There was a comment that cropped up yesterday on the channel where someone's using the Galleria GHAD39 and they're saying, my trigger, I'm pulling it back, why have I got to pull it back so far before I get paint out of it? Now this is sort of basing what I was basing this video around, because I'm going to use that brush today. We're going to incorporate this brush as a beginner's brush. We're going to do some mixing for a beginner. I'm going to run through some paints to show you consistencies and things like that, just so you can get it up in your head on, right, first thing to do is get the paint right, then we can dial the brush in, then we can commit to the artwork. So there's loads of brands of paint, there really is. There's just so many brands of paint, and it's knowing what to go for, what to stick with. Now I've tried loads over the years and I'm still trying paints today, but I always stick to a certain few that I know exactly how to mix them, how they spray, how they lay down, what they can be intermixed with as well. And I'll stick to them paints because then I've got no dramas. I know I can just go with that brand, I know exactly how to mix it. That'll go with that, or go with that one, that'll go with that, and mixes that ratio. Now, the ones you see on the table here, there are airbrush paints that are straight out the bottle, that can go straight in the brush and you can get on with. And there's ones here that you have really got to dilute, and there's ones here that you could put down with a roller on your wall, but you could still use these paints with the airbrush. And this is where it gets a lot of beginners confusing, because there's airbrush paints here as well that say straight in the airbrush and spray, and they don't. You'd put them in the brush and they won't spray. You'd be cranking the pressure up that high on the brush to try and force it out. It's an absolute nightmare. And these are the ones that are the cheap sets you will see on eBay and Amazon, where there's 40 colours for a certain price, airbrush paint. And then the first thing you do is, we all do it, we go straight down to the reviews and check out what people have said. And you'll get like such a mixed bag of reviews, like, oh, this paint's amazing. Well, it probably was amazing for Tom that used it with his roller and painted his kid's bedroom with, but then the actual person that's using it for an airbrush is having an absolute nightmare with it. So I'll point you in the direction of brands that I use. We'll mix them up, we'll chuck it through a beginner's brush, and I'll just show you some consistencies. Not a problem. So brush is the Galleria GHAD39. Now if you own that brush, you will get two needle and nozzle sizes with that. You're going to get a 035 and you're going to get a 05. Now basing this on your needle and nozzle size as well, if you're running a bigger needle and nozzle size, that brush will coat with a little bit thicker paint. A 05 is still a small needle and nozzle when you look at it and think, crikey, that paint's got to go through that tiny little hole that 05's coming through. And then when you come down smaller needle and nozzle, you've got to remember that you're trying to push paint through a very tiny hole out of a brush. So I've got the 035 set up. Now the best thing to do first is get your brush. I've got this at 20 psi, and that's water, right? So chuck some water in your brush and go, right, well, that is atomizing and spraying that, and that's water. Perfect. So if the brush does it with water like that, perfect. You're aiming for a consistency that is close to water. Teeny bit thicker, not too thick, because you want it to atomize like when you see water coming out your brush. So if the brush can cope with that, don't put anything thicker than that in it. That's all you've got to do. Just think along them lines. So paints, ones that you can put straight in the brush and paint with. Createx Illustration, these ones are the transparent. the createx illustration here. This is Payne's Grey transparent. So this is straight out the bottle and in the brush, 20 psi. As you can see, atomising really nice. So that's a paint you can put straight out the bottle and spray with. Now you can dilute this as well. Now to dilute createx illustration, you can use their reducer if you want, but you can use water. So you can put a few drops of water in that, back bubble it, and you can dilute it with water. Now if you do thin down createx illustration with water, you can now drop your pressure down as well, because it's a very thin mix. It's like water in there. When you look inside the cup, that is very washed out and it's like water. So you can start to come down on your pressure. If you've been watching the channel on the miniatures and things like that, I've been painting and I'm starting to run really low pressure. That's the sort of paint that I would use when I'm doing some real fine detail work. Was the createx illustration. So that is a dilution with water and straight out the bottle and painting with. So that is a brilliant paint. I would put that on the top 5 of my list of paints to be using. Is createx illustration. You can use that one. The next one is Wicked Colours. Another one by Createx. Now this paint is really good, but it's thick. I'll just demonstrate the thickness of it. Now, that paint is thick, you can see that. That ain't going to spray through the brush. It's not even moving on that plastic mixing pot. So then you're thinking, well that, looking at it, is not going to go through an airbrush. But if you mix that with either the Createx reducer that you can get to mix that paint with, or I'm mixing the new Wicked with isopropanol and just mix that up. Literally put in, if you've done 1 drop of the Wicked, you want to be dropping in around 20 to 25 drops of iso with that. Just mix that up. So you've seen the size of that drop that was in the bottom of that plastic cup. Isopropanol will mix this down. You've got to use a wooden stirrer and give it a little bit of a stir, but it does mix down. So that is the Wicked with ISO. Now it really does thin it down. That's another one that I'm using if I'm doing full-on detail stuff where I'm going up really close, is that it sort of brings it to the same sort of consistency as the Createx illustration and the same sort of transparency as that. But it's a brilliant paint and flows very nice through the brush mixed with isopropanol. You don't have to mix this with isopropanol, you can mix it with their reducer. When you check out the description in today's video, there will be links to a website that will stock most of these paints that we've got on here today. The ones that need the reducers and their mixing schemes will be like the illustration or the Wicked. You'll see their reducers in with the sets on the website. So you can go that way, but you can go my way with isopropanol. It's not a problem, it does work. So that's the Wicked. Just empty that one out. So that's another one in my top 5, which is a brilliant airbrush paint. Mixing it quite simply with a bit of ISO. I'm using it on the channel, it works. It's one of my go-to. It's on the shelf in the studio and that's the one I use. Now the next one we're going to go with is Golden Highflow. Now Golden Highflow acrylics will spray straight out the bottle through your airbrush, but it sprays better if you thin it. Now Golden Highflow acrylics, you can use water, And that's another reason why I was going to be one of my other top 5 to go to, because it's a simple, easy solution to dilute it. You're not having to order a reducer. You can just fill up some tap water out your kitchen, like I've got here, and you can mix this and spray this. So we'll drop a bit of golden in. Now this one is shading grey, transparent shading grey, and this is out the bottle. So that will spray out the bottle like that. So you're getting that, well, it is a transparent, so you're getting that same sort of look with the paint, with the transparent. I have got other colours in golden, like the opaques, and that will spray the same. It will spray like that out the bottle at around 20 psi. We've ballparked this today at 20 psi. You can thin golden, as I said, and if you are thinning golden down, do 1 drop of water to 1 drop of golden. It's simple, just 1 to 1 or 50-50 mix with the golden, and it will spray 20 psi, nice and easy in your brush. It's atomising it when you look at it like water, coming out the brush nice. So that's a simple paint to use and a simple mix. That's another reason why it's on my top 5 to use, because I know it works. It's simple, it's not a headache to get on with, just a simple mix like that and you're painting. So that's golden. The next one is, you've got Comart. Now that's the only bottle of Comart that I've got. Comart is a very nice airbrush paint. It's very thin, so if you're doing the photorealistic work where you're doing erasing and doing the scratch backs and things like that, Comart will spray straight out the bottle, and it's very easy to manipulate. You can erase with it and things like that. So Comart is another one, straight out the bottle. You've not got to dilute it, you're good to go. So that's another one that's sort of on my list, but I don't really use it a lot. I've got white in Comart, but it does work straight in the airbrush, so that's a good one to use. The next one is, let's just clean this out, FW inks. If you've been following the channel, it's my go-to. This is my top one. Number 1 for me is the FW. I'm mixing the FW with water and isopropanol. So I'm going on the FW. If you know the FW bottles, when you unscrew them, you've got a little pipette on the top, a little squeegee pipette on the top of the bottle. You will undo your bottle, so drop 1, 2, just go 2 drops of ink, we'll go 2 drops water, and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I've gone 5 drops of ISO. Now I'm mixing this like this because I'm usually doing very detailed work with it. FW inks will spray straight out the bottle in an airbrush, not a problem, because it's ink. This is the mix that's in the brush now, so that's, pull that through. That sprays really nice like that. So when you look at it, they're all coming across the same sort of board like that. That sort of consistency and how they spray in the tone, they're all hitting the same. And this is what I'm using for my detail work, is that they're the ones I'll be using, them paints, because I know I can come down on them pressures with them mixes on these, and they all work. I've got no dramas with them. I've just mixed that nice and simple in front of you there. 2 drops of ink, 2 drops of water, 5 drops of ISO. Job done. I know I can drop that pressure down, can bring that pressure down in the brush, low pressure, and it will spray. So when I'm doing detail work, it just works. get your nice consistency, you can get your nice lines, no issues. So they're my go-tos. That's another ink, that's the Crawford and Black. That's another ink, so that will spray out the bottle, and then you can thin it down again with water, and that will spray like that. So I can move that over into my go-to because I know how it sprays and how it thins. Now the other ones that are on the table here, we've got another Wicked here. This is the old version Wicked, so that will be with their reducer. So I'll follow the guidelines with what they say do the reducing and their thinner, because that's the old version Wicked. I've not tried this one yet, the old one with ISO, but the new version 2 works really well with it. So I'll move that over there. Now we're left with these ones on the table. Now these are your thicker acrylics. These are your cheaper acrylics. And these are the ones you are going to have issues with. So all them ones to that side, if you've got any of them and you mix them to them ratios, you won't have any dramas with your brush. You won't be choking your brush, or it'll just be painting absolutely fine. So there you go to. These ones are your headaches, but you still can spray them. Now that's a thick bodied artist acrylic. This one is, these are airbrush paints from Amazon. This brand here is your cheaper airbrush paints, and these are the ones where I say you see the reviews and they go, oh, it's a brilliant paint, sprayed straight out the bottle and you won't have any dramas with it. Right, this is the cheap Amazon one. Now that is not going to spray straight out the bottle. You can see how slow that's running down the paper, and this is apparently airbrush paint that you can spray straight out the bottle. So this is where beginners get confused, and this is where it gets frustrating for beginners, because they buy these cheap sets, they chuck it straight in the brush, drop, 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 and then it all chokes up, and it's like, oh, what do I mix it down with, and what's the consistency, how do I get it to spray? So we'll drop some of that in there. So as you can see, that is thick, yeah? That's way too thick for an airbrush, it really is. So we're going to go water. We'll drop water in that. Drop a bit of water. First thing you want to test these paints with when you get them is water, just to see how they mix up. So I've dropped a little bit of water in that. It's just basically a little test. That's all you've got to do. Get yourself some little plastic pots. There'll be a link in the description to some of these. They're really handy. And some wooden sticks, coffee stirrers. Little mix up on that. Clean that brush out. So now we've got a more thinned out mix. Now that was like 2 drops of that paint, you've seen it in that pot, and I just chucked quite a bit of water in it. I didn't count it how much, I just chucked a bit in, and you're aiming for that watered down. When we started the video, where you could see water spraying through the brush. You could see it atomising. When you look at it, you'll see the atomisation coming out your brush. So you're aiming for that sort of thinned out watery consistency. You can go up and down on that mix. If it's too thin, now that's spraying, but look how grainy the actual paint is. And this is what you will see with cheaper paints. The actual pigments and the bodies of the paint are really nasty. The airbrush paints that we used at the beginning, where I sprayed here, they've all atomised very clean, and the paint is just atomised soft around the edges on all of these. When you start coming into these cheaper bodied acrylics and you're trying to get them thinned down, yes, you'll thin them down to spray because we've got it. But look at the state of the paint. It's grainy, it's nasty, it doesn't work. So you'll get it to the consistency because that's spraying. You can see how thin that is. Really, really thin. You know, but it's a very grainy paint and gritty paint because it's cheap. So my advice, start off with a decent paint. Yes, if you're on a budget, we've just used the cheap one. Now, if you're practicing and you're just practicing on paper like this, doing lines, dots, dagger strokes, this one is the way to go. If you're just practicing, you're just practicing shapes and things like this and doing movements, buy the cheap paint all day long and thin it down to a real thin consistency like we just did and just blast it at paper and throw it away. The best thing to do with that paint is just to spray it on a piece of paper and throw it away, because I wouldn't use it on artwork. I really wouldn't, because you are battling with trying to get it to lay down clean, soft atomization. And that was thinned out, really thin, and it's just spitting, it's grainy, it's just not a nice paint. So that's them, that's the same brand, that's them too. These ones are just as thick. Now, this one is a thick acrylic. So you're going to see this. Well, now again, that is thick. See that? That's not going anywhere in that. That's a dot of paint. That's basically what I put in on the last one you've just seen, that black paint we just sprayed. That's the sort of the amount I put in the pot. So then you'll go straight for water, because a lot of these are water-based acrylics. So if you first mix in water, instantly go for your water. Now we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 drops of water to that dot of paint. Let's just give that a little mix. So this is a cheap paint, this blue. This isn't airbrush paint, this is basically one you would get to use with a paintbrush. So we'll drop that in there. And again, 20 psi. Now this one is a little bit better than the actual airbrush paint that was listed on Amazon. This one isn't listed as airbrush paint at all, but it sprays better than the actual airbrush black. Now, I've used this, and this is why I sort of stock this as like backup paint. If I need a certain colour and quite a lot of it, I know I can make a batch of stuff like this up. I can tweak this mix on this. But that is spraying and atomizing a lot better than that black. Now that is £1 for thick artist acrylic. You could probably make up a litre of paint mixed for your airbrush with that amount in there. Not a problem, diluting it and thinning it. So that mix at 20 is spraying. It's not great, but if you're doing a background piece and you're doing sort of a sky pattern, need a bit of blue, you can tweak that, mix around with the water, really give it a good, I don't think exactly, I'm stirring it with a wooden stick, so it's not exactly giving it a full-on mix. And it was a tiny little bit. I would decant that into a small bottle with a shaker, and I'd shake it in a bottle, mixed in a bottle, and it would come out a lot better, a lot smoother. But this was like a quick mix, so it is looking a little bit grainy. But that does work. So you can get round these cheaper paints, you really can. But do you want the headache of mucking around, thinning them down, trying to get them to flow right, thinning them down? So another cheap one, we've got another one which is the Crafter's Choice. It does work the same, that works the same as that, that one works the same as that. This one is an airbrush paint, so This one's going to be moved over to this side because that's basically a sort of one-to-one mix, nice and simple one. I don't really use this stuff. If any of you have seen this, never used it. I got sent it as a sample, never tried it. Apparently it's supposed to be quite good. So that is an airbrush paint on that side. So other thinning and flow improvers that you can use, Golden do one, Winsor Newton do one. I've got one there which is water. Your go-to is water. First thing you want to start mixing it with and trying it is water, first and foremost. Then you can start playing around with different flow improvers. Some of these ones you can add a little bit of water and you can add a little bit of flow improver because this will break down the paint on the flow improvers, which is that one, the Winsor Newton one. I'll leave a link in the description to that. You can use that with your thicker bodied acrylics. I've tried that with Golden High Flow as well and it does work. Golden High Flow do one which is a high flow medium. What that does is it makes it flow, and it basically can turn an opaque paint and you can turn it to transparent. It takes the opacity out of the paint and brings it more across to a transparent paint. So you can use that. You can use, as we've just shown, isopropanol to thin. So they're sort of my go-to if I want to flow them, thin them down. But the main one's water. Always go with water first. Then when you're going into solvent, I've got some solvent there. You're going to be using 2K thinners. Solvent-based paints are more than likely 2K thinners to thin it down. Simple, it's just 50-50 with solvent-based coats and things like that. It's just 50-50 mixed with thinners. You're good to go. If you're used to spraying with big spray guns and you use solvents, that's the sort of mix you will use to thin your paints down for bigger guns. But then you can also thin that down like that for airbrushes. So you can use your solvent paints that you use for spraying cars in your airbrushes. You mix it the same 50-50 with thinners. Good to go. It'll atomize and spray perfect. So your go-tos, the ones we showed at the beginning, we've got Wicked version 2 gets a thumbs up. Createx illustration gets a thumbs up. Golden High Flow acrylics, brilliant. FW inks, brilliant. We've got ComArt, very thin from the start and it will spray absolutely easy. Another good one. Wicked version 1, that's a good one. FW inks again. Crawford and Black will work. They're the sort of go-tos, no dramas. You've seen the mixing ratios and they spray like that. My advice is if you do get bottles like this, what I've done with my paints, or you get the FW inks, I've got the little bottles, there's a link in the description to some small bottles, and I've mixed them, them mixing ratios that you've seen, I've mixed them, pre-mixed, decanted it and put it into working bottles for when I'm doing videos on the channel for you guys and doing portraits. I've got a paint scheme mixed up. They're all ready to go. So I've got no dramas. I can just pick a colour off the wall and it will spray like that instantly. Every colour will spray like that. Instead of grabbing a bottle, mucking around, mixing it in a little pot, trying to get it to flow right. Set yourself a day where you're just going to be mixing paint, get a load of empty pots and mix your colours, decant them up, mix them with your different ways of flow agency, whatever you prefer, but always go to water first. Decant them, put a shaker in them and you've got paint that's going to last and it's good to go. Why have paint like this sitting on the side and then you've got to faff around with it? Just mix it straight off the bat and decant it, get it in a small tub with a shaker in it and you're good to go. You've got airbrush paint mixed up, it's on the shelf, it's ready. You can put all this stuff and you can store this. This is what I do. All these artists acrylic like that and my airbrush paints are stored out the way in a cool, dry place. The only time I need to mix them is when I run low out of my pre-mixed ones that are on the shelf. So I hope this has helped you out on paint consistency. Just get your brush for a start, spray water through it like that, and you'll see water and how the brush atomizes it, and you'll hear the sound of the brush. When you spray water through it, you hear that sort of raspy type sound, and you'll see the mist coming out, and you gotta think, well, the brush can spray that water. That's the sort of consistency I've got to aim for, is water, probably water to a little bit thicker. People say semi-skimmed milk consistency. You get it to that consistency on your mixing, you're good to go. Now, if you do go too thin and you're used to running 20 psi as a ballpark, 20 psi, and your paint is thin, you can get around that by adding a little bit more paint to bring the consistency up a little bit more. Just aim to get it to that little teeny bit thicker because you've washed it out too much. So you can put it in your mixing pot, add another drop of paint, stir it up. You're aiming for that consistency of semi-skimmed. But if you are really thin, just drop your pressure down. So all you got to do is start to bring your pressure down. So you've got your real thin mix. If it's really, we'll drop this one in it. You've got a really thin mix and you can see it spidering. You instantly go up to the paper and it's blowing out and you know it's thin. You just bring your pressure down. Just drop your pressure. Go to the side, have a little play. And then you'll get it to where the brush is spraying it really nice and close, like that. You're not getting any spider webbing, you just bring your pressure down. If it's a little bit thicker than like your semi-skimmed, you can just slightly bring your pressure up, back up to say your 20 psi, this was running really low then, back up to your 20, and you're good to go. You're aiming for your paint to be clean. When you spray it, you're aiming for a clean line. You best to do a full line. Do a pass with the brush, like a line, like that. I'm just going dark on this so you can see it. If you've got a clean, consistent line with no breaks or any grainy bits coming out top and bottom, it's clean, it's atomized nice, soft, top and bottom on that line. You've got no breaks in it. Your brush is running absolutely fine. Your paint's running brilliant. So you just got to aim for that. It's very simple when you know what to look for, but it is very frustrating when you don't. So that's my sort of mixing ratio. They're the ones I use in the studio and my day-to-day are my go-to paints because there's no dramas. But I can move over to these ones, the thicker bodied ones, if I need to. And I'll just aim to get that semi-skimmed milk consistency with these thicker bodied paints. I can get it and manipulate it to work like that. And that's all we've got to do. But my advice is, if you're doing things like this, you're an absolute beginner and you're just having a play and just practicing with your brush. Yes, go for the cheap acrylics, but just get some empty bottles, mix, get the mixing ratio right, decant it so you've got it in a working bottle of airbrush paint that you can then practice with. You're practicing with your brush. Now, that's practice and you'll be throwing away. So that's your throwaway paint. When it comes to you're starting to move on and progress and you're going to do artwork, then you buy quality paint. You buy the FW inks, you buy the createx illustration, a bit of com art, a bit of golden high flow. You buy them paints because it's a little bit dearer and you don't want to be throwing that in the bin. You want to be throwing it at a piece of paper to create a piece of artwork which you're either going to give away to a family member or you'll be selling. So good airbrush paint when you're progressing. When you're starting out and you're throwing stuff away like this will be going in the bin. Cheap. cheap paint, because you're just going to throw it away. So I hope that's helped you out. Consistencies, as I say, it is simple when you know how, but an absolute pain in the arse when you don't. Now back to the brush. You've just seen all them paints perform with that. Yeah, no dramas. The GH8039 on a 035 performed perfect. All mixed to that consistency. So for the person saying that he's really pulling back to get the paint out, if you're struggling with your brush and you're really having to pull back to get the paint out, stop what you're doing, unclip your brush, clean it. First thing, clean it. Take the front off, clean the nozzle out, flush your brush through, give it a good clean, put it to one side. Now look at your paint mix, because I guarantee it's going to be your paint mix. If you're really pulling back on a 035 to get paint out of it, you've either got a clogged up front end of the brush. So that's why I say unplug it, clean your brush, strip your brush down, gut it, blast through, clip it back in, spray through, so you're spraying through clean. And now put your brush to one side and go straight and look at your paint. You just got to dial in and home in on the things that could make that brush falter like that. Then look at your paint, get your paint consistency to what we just mixed it to, and you'll have no dramas. So if you are pulling too far back on your trigger and struggling to get paint out at say 20 psi, or if you're running 25 psi and you're struggling to get paint out, it's definitely an issue with the paint. It's too thick or your brush is clogged. So that one clears that up, so nice and simple. And always clean your brush after you have used it. Don't leave paint in it, don't leave it on the side to dry up with painting, because you are just creating issues, and you want to eliminate issues when you airbrush. All the issues and problems are down to you guys that are using it, the beginners that are using it. If you don't follow simple guidelines by keeping your brush clean, first and foremost, and your paint consistency is getting a little bit slack and not mixing them to the right consistency, then just think, yeah, I can get this to spray. I'll just up the pressure to 50 psi and blast it through. Just get a little bit regimental with what you do and stick to that. You'll have no issues, because we are the ones that create the issues. Little blast through, little bit of water, little bubble back, and there you go. That's spraying clean. That's your brush clean. So just doing that, that's eliminated an issue for you right there for when you pick the brush back up, because you know it's clean. So your brush is clean. The next time you come to start, you've done the first step, that's clean. The next step is, right, I'll sort my paint out. But then if you've got it decanted straight away, that and that is sorted. So all you've got to do is that, straight out the thing, straight in there, pull it through, and you're painting. You've got perfect paint that's flowing absolutely lovely in that brush, and your brush is clean. It's easy, guys. It really is. It is simple. A lot of it is you lot making it hard for yourself by not following simple rules and sticking to them rules when you're doing your airbrushing. So all you've got to do is stick to them simple rules, and your life will be easier and you will enjoy it. I was in exactly the same place, but the person that taught me said exactly what I've told you there. Clean your brush, use this paint. I went straight on to golden high flow. I didn't use all these cheap nasty acrylics at the start. I got pushed straight into golden high flow when I started, because I knew the artist that taught me was using that paint, and he'd used it for years and years. So I thought, well, that's working for him. I'm going down that road because it works for him. Why struggle? Another quick blast through. Wipe your brush and you're good to go. That's all it is. So go for them paint brands. I'll leave some links in the description so you can have a look on them paint brands. But if you're on a budget, because we've not got loads of money and this stuff is expensive when you're laying out for bottles and bottles of paint. I know it's not cheap, but if you're mixing it right, this paint goes a long way. Airbrush paint goes a long way. It really does. Because a lot of the time you're just using it for artwork. You're not sort of using it to spray down the side of a car panel and use it as a solid colour. You're using it for pieces of artwork, so it lasts a long time. So these bottles do last a long time. And when you store your bottles, because we're all a nightmare for this. When you get bottles like that, just give them a little wipe round the tops. Round the tops of your bottles there, just give them a little wipe. You'll find with these ones you'll get caked up paint over here. Now usually if I'm doing some artwork, if I've got any of these ones, I'll usually get a bit of thinners on a rag before I start and just wipe the tops of these. Just so none of that, it's nice and clean, so when you're pouring that out, you're not getting any crappy bits of paint dropping in. That's what you'll find with ones like that. When you use the FW, that's why I get new bottles of this now, and I'll decant it and mix it, because this ink dries on the threads of the glass bottles, the jars. It can get a little bit, it dries and it goes like brittle, cracks. The paint does. So just try and keep your threads clean and sort of decant these centre of the hole in the jar and droplet it down. Try not to get any spillage down the threads of the glass, because this goes quite brittle and it looks like, if you've ever mixed, whenever you use like your clear coats and you undo the lid on your hardener, that's the same, where you see it around the threads and it cracks, and you can literally pick it off and it's like hardened, looks like little glass shards. You'll get the same with that. Whenever I'm mixing clear coat, I'll undo the lid of the hardener, take the lid off, and then just tilt the can and blow the top of the can off, because you get all them little bits. That's going to go into your clear coat. So you've just got to always have one step ahead when it comes to paint on your mixing. Clean the tops of your bottles on any airbrush paint. Don't leave any of these open like that, because then air's getting in. Always nip them up, clean them when you finish your lesson, and just keep your paint lids clean. It's trying to keep everything clean. So that's another thing you got to do, is just look after your paints as well, and you'll be absolutely fine. So I hope this has helped you out. Simple, guys, don't make it a headache. It's easy. Just mix it like that. You'll be good to go. So thanks for watching, guys. Drop your comments, tell me your thoughts, and I will see you in tomorrow's video, because we have got this one coming up tomorrow. So cheers.